Welcome to Pop Culture Retro, which was recently voted the 15th best podcast by the residents of the Golden Years Retirement Community in Boca Raton, Florida. Each show, we'll revisit some of your favorite pop culture memories with insider and outsider perspectives. Now, please help me welcome your hosts, Ike Eisenmann and Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Pop Culture Retro. I'm one of your hosts, Jonathan Rosen, along with Ike Eisenmann, and today we are thrilled to welcome the VP of Creative Development for Sid and Marty Krofft Pictures. He was also manager of collections and preservation for the Walt Disney Archives, and he's the author of the great book, Back to the Future Almanac, 1985 to 2015. Please help us welcome Rob Klein. Rob, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, how are you?
Looking over items to talk to you about, there are so many different topics. You've had an incredible career, so we'll jump around a bit. But let's start with your current role as the VP of Creative Development for Sid and Marty Croft. What does that job entail, and how did you get into it?
I had met Marty about 23 years ago, and I had gotten a hold of a sleeve stack from the 73, 74. Actually, they had auctioned it off, and it was like literally like had been like run over by like a steamroller. It was flat and wouldn't move. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna restore this thing. And long story short, I ended up restoring the only other suit that the Crofts had as well. So I think Marty was impressed with that, and that sort of led to me doing stuff with them today. So I have the sleeve stack to thank.
Oh, I love that show so much.
Well, what are you doing with them now?
Well, now I basically doing a little bit of everything. So we like it'll be one day like, hey, where's this? There's this document that might be, Marty will want me to go look for something interesting. Or the next day it's like, how would you do Land of the Lost? That kind of thing. It's like, wow, and so you kind of throw out your opinion. So it's very different from day to day.
I do have to ask one question on this topic with the Land of the Lost here. Okay, we had Sid Croft on before. He was not a fan of the movie. Was Marty?
Was that what was that?
We had Sid Croft on. He was not a fan of the movie.
As I understand it, they were not probably fans of the way that it performed. It didn't do too well, I don't think. I don't think it brought in a lot of money. I think that was probably his biggest disappointment with it. To tell you the truth. Yeah, because I mean, not a lot of people liked that movie, and I had actually never seen it when Marty hired me, and he says, "What'd you think of the Will Ferrell movie?" I said, "Well, I haven't seen it." He's like, "Why not?" And I said, "Because I didn't want it to break my heart, so I didn't watch the movie, because I knew it was going to be different than the '70s one, and it just wasn't. So I didn't watch it." He's like, "Well, you got to see it." So anyway, so I watched it, and I actually thought for what it was exactly what it was. Will Ferrell Saturday Night Live sketch, 2-hour comedy of Land of the Lost.
Yeah. I have not seen it. I have not seen it either for very much the same reasons you didn't want to see it.
Yeah, it's not the 70s show, and then the 90s show I'm actually not that familiar with, but it was very popular. I don't know if you remember that.
I did see that, yes.
I don't. But were you a Krofft fan growing up?
Oh yeah, because they were just like anything else. They were literally, you had Walt Disney's on Sundays, with the Wonderful World of Disney, and you're just ingrained with that. And then Saturday mornings were Croft's stuff. You're like, oh, okay, and very imaginative, and I was very aware of it as a kid. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Marty still works regularly. Sid has no involvement though right now, right? Or he does.
Exactly. And then Marty comes in every day. He's a force of nature. I mean, when you can see why why they did so much is because he's just a tenacious. When you work with people, you get to see that. Oh, this is why he's done so much, because he just won't stop. He's got that drive.
I mean,
so.
I hope I have half of it when I reach that that tender age. Um, well, other than the Slee Stag, do you have any other, props or items from the original series?
Oh yeah, because there were two auctions the Crofts did. They did one in the late 90s and then one in the early 2000s. And the one from the early 2000s, I tried to get, they had like a lot of, like they had Wonderbug. Remember, I don't know if you remember that show, is the flying puppet. I bought that.
Wow.
They also had one of the hand puppets from Land of the Lost of the characters called Big Alice. There's Grumpy and then there's
Yes.
Big Alice. So there was a close-up hand puppet of that. I got it. I could send you guys a photo.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, those are the first two that comes to mind. Yeah, but anything that kind of touched me as a kid, if I could rescue it and see that it's put in a plexiglass box and it exists, I feel like I'm doing my bit for King and Country there. So everybody needs to know Big Alice is safe. She's in a plexi case.
No. Are the Slee Stacks just as terrifying now as they were when you were a kid?
No, not as much, but I mean, because once you start, you're getting, down to the point, it's like, there's 8 digits on the spine of the Slee Stack, not 9, or that kind of minutia. You start seeing the details and you don't really see the bigger picture. What is that story? They say like, you can't see the forest through the trees comment, so I don't know what I see anymore.
Well, no, is there like any outreach to do any events to the original stars of any of the series at all? Do the Crofts want them involved in anything?
You cut out for a second. The question was:
Is there any like sort of outreach for the to the original stars of all these different series to like become involved in events or anything?
It's so early on in the process, and I don't even know if it's even been officially announced that there's something coming in the future, or hopefully, I mean, because it's still, so much happens, and as Ike, as you know better than anybody, things start and stop, or it never happens. But yeah, I mean, I don't. Yeah, so who knows? Sky's the limit. I just hope we get a Slee Stack action figure out of it, at least for what they've never made one to this day.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah, it's one of those things you think that there would be, and I know that the fans, I want one, and it just hasn't happened yet.
Well,
action figures are a big deal in today's world,
Well, I don't just mean Land of the Lost, like any of the other Krofft series. Is there any sort of outreach to have them involved in Krofft events or at all?
Yeah, I think a few of them came out we did a thing called KroftCon in Orinda, California in last May, kind of just sprang up and Krofft got involved to make it an official event. And a lot of Marty's alumni came and were out. It was really neat to see everybody. And then some people I met for the first time at that event as well for myself. It was pretty great. Do you like Johnny Whitaker was there, Butch Patrick came, Peter, so Chris Knight from the Brady Bunch, because the Crofts did the Brady Bunch Variety Hour.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Classic television. A few more guests that I think Carolyn Ellis, who was a Bugaloo, if you remember her.
Oh wow.
She phoned in from Scotland. I think that's where she's at, living these days. So
she is on my wish list for our show, so I'm going to have to reach out at some point.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we can help put you in touch with.
That would be great.
Carolyn Ellis.
Anyone. So what do the Crofts have on tap? So they have an anniversary thing coming up?
No anniversary plan that I know of. There's so many little projects that were, the main thing, and this is something I'll share that I'm personally working on, is that at least for me, my main thing is to get like the Krofft shows out again. Like, like obviously there's going to be a Krofft like channel, but with the way that the world works, I guess this is something new to me, is like selling shows against, like if you go to like a station like CBS, they want the right to kind of show the shows, and it's not as valuable to them if something's on like a Tubi or a Pluto television, because it's streaming. They want to be kind of an exclusive. So I guess, long story short, is this, hopefully the Krofft shows will be back up again, and then eventually a Krofft channel where everything lives. I mean, that'd
be amazing.
That has to happen, and it will. It's just the logistics of that. And I know I've done the fun part, or the easy part was just making sure that all the master tapes are there. And I literally like put my hands on each and every one from every series. So I literally not only can say like, oh yeah, we'll go and pull them from the vault when it's time, because it's like now we can definitively say on our end, they exist, they're there, they're ready to go. And then now all the paperwork has to happen, the legal, which is so complicated, as you know, with anything, so
that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Oh man, absolutely. Oh my God. So we obviously now really want to talk to you about your time with the Disney Archives. That was where you and I first met back in 2009. Sure. And because I was in town for the premiere of Race to Witch Mountain, and every time I go to LA, I visit the studio, because I have to tell you, of course, it's my home away from home. It's my favorite place on the planet, and the Archives has a special place in my heart, because I met Dave Smith at a very early age, and he was so, as anyone who met him and had a chance to meet him knows, he was such a wonderful, generous, kind man with all kinds of incredible information in his head. How did you get involved with that?
The Archives, how that's how I got there?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I tend to be long-winded because I have so much detail. So I don't make, because I know we want to talk about stuff. So I'll try to make the
long-winded is good.
No, don't worry about it.
Okay.
I will contribute to your long-windedness, because I have a couple
stories. I want to shut up, and I want to hear what you have to say. But by the way, I know I can do some Dave Smith. I mean, he was like, "Hey, Ike." Oh, that was kind of the Dave Smith character.
Yeah, exactly. That's wonderful.
No, they were okay. Some at the time, from my perspective, I was just asked if I'd ever consider applying to go to work for the Disney Archives by a couple people that I knew that knew them, and I guess at the time it was just I had never. I mean, that'd be awesome, just didn't think about ever doing that. Turns out from the Disney side, which I found later, the prop and the wardrobe department were going to close, sadly. And they wanted somebody that could come in and look through all that stuff, that had a good eye for things and help pull out the history. And also they needed somebody that could also fix things, and I guess that they had been asking around, and my name had come up, like, oh, have you ever met Rob Klein? So I got invited to meet one of the archivists, and then they said, oh, you should apply. And then, when I started, I did all that. Then I thought, man, I might have a chance to go to work for the Walt Disney Company. So then it started really sinking in. And then I became like very neurotic and like, oh my God, I got to find out. And then luckily they said, oh, we would hire you. And then it was magical. So it was like the high point of my life, getting that position to do that. So that was my way in. And then one of the great things was meeting you that day. So I mean, I'm usually not that kind. I usually, like, if I see somebody and I don't really know them, I usually don't say anything, because I'd rather be introduced to somebody.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah. Because you never know when, like, hey, excuse me, why are you bothering me? Or something like that. But on that day I saw you and I said, oh, I had to say hello. So I'm glad.
And man, believe me, it was fantastic for me, because you brought out the original miniature RV that was used for the special effects flying sequences, and I had never seen it, and I was just blown away. It was just incredible to get a chance to see that. And I'm going to share right now my
Yeah.
my major little collectible that I kept, that Dave Smith
Oh yeah.
begged me for
Oh yeah.
more than once.
Oh,
And
that's
he
great.
said, if you ever, he just kept saying, if you ever want to, give the harmonica to a really good home, we have a place in the case right here for it. Because they had Tia's star case in there. Dave had that on display for quite a long time in that front little room that originally was kind of the bulk of what they had on display. And I just thought, man, I don't know, this is pretty special to me. I think I'm gonna hang on to it. So
Good for you. Now the
yeah.
store case, I love race. I love. I actually was said Race to Witch Mountain. That's the new one. Escape
Yeah.
to Witch Mountain. Yours. I mean, those are big parts of my childhood, just like with Croft. So I mean,
Mm,
when I got to the archives, I think the Mini Winnie, as it's called, was in
yeah.
Florida.
Huh.
And what had happened was, at some point when Planet Hollywood came kind of up, and the Hollywood Studios was being built, Burbank, the Walt Disney Studios, the originals, were kind of like, oh well, let's send a lot of our assets to the Florida park. And that's how, like, the Mini Winnie went out there. And I think that may have been why the star case, I never saw it in the archives. I had heard
Mm,
that it had it just like that, and I had access to everything. And as a fan, I would have loved it. I would have pulled it out and had to look at it. Let's see the star case. I'd never seen it, so I wonder if I hope it's still around. Stuff does go missing, by the way, but
Oh, that's what we wanted to ask you about, because like I always pictured like this vast warehouse, like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, with section after section of crates, and nobody knows what's in it. Ike said it wasn't like that. He told me, but you found like over 6,000 items that had been thought lost,
yeah.
were lost, or sold off. So, what are some of the things that you found, and just
Oh yeah.
how does that happen to begin with? That they lose their own, items.
Well, they just, because it's just what the studios do, and this is not to make Disney sound unprofessional or bad, but if it's in the property department, it's there to be rented. The asset it becomes a rentable. This is to generate money. The historical value of it is ceases to be of any consequence at that point. I mean, people in the prop department may know, oh, that was made for this movie, but really it's irrelevant any longer. And the thing is, people go, oh, well, the really cool stuff is put behind lock and key. It's like, not necessarily, So that's why an archives department is so important at studios, is to have the experts that say, look, there's no world where we need to rent Mary Poppins' hat again. And that's
yeah.
what they were doing, because the wardrobe, the archives had one, to be fair, but there was another one that we found in the wardrobe department that was just being rented. And it's like, and you're not blaming the people that work in the wardrobe department. They're lovely people, but that's not what their thing is, their expertise. They could tell you all about what kind of a hat it is or how it's constructed, but the historical nature may or may not be, they may or not be aware of that.
Yeah.
So we find that kind of stuff. I mean, I use that as probably the creme de la creme of, we found Mary Poppins hat. And then there's like stuff from, like, lesser movies, but it's like, I mean, and that's not to pick on anything, but there could be something real obscure movie that no one ever saw. I'm trying to think of an example. But I mean,
I'll say one of our dinosaurs is missing. I like.
yeah. Well, that was an English production, so we had. I don't. That's a whole other story. You want a Star Wars connection to that? See, we're going to go off on a side road. Do you know that the one of our dinosaurs is missing? It's like a brontosaurus skeleton. It's kind of an iconic image from that. So the skeleton was used in Star Wars as the crate dragon. If you know the film well,
Oh,
where
wow.
C-3PO is in the desert and you see this crazy skeleton behind him on the sand dune. It's
Yeah.
that's the one of our dinosaurs is
Oh
missing
my
from the
gosh.
original
Wow.
that they reuse for Star Wars. And not nuts.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
That
I
it
mean,
does.
talk about like Disney's got their hands in everything. You can't escape
That's
it.
amazing.
God. Well, there's I had a very interesting experience with kind of that l- lack of attention to the history of the studio, in the sense that when I was shooting Witch Mountain there, or I actually came to do my ADR and re-record, do my ADR recording on B stage, um, there was this little room, this storage room behind B stage. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it housed all of the original handmade sound effects machines that they used going back to the Silly Symphonies and all the cartoons. And
Wow.
so I got to go in there and touch and play and do all of this, and I was absolutely overwhelmed by it. And I ended up telling the story to the sound engineer. Doc Kane is his name. He is still on B stage to this day. He's been there for decades, and he was hired by Disney to come in and redesign the sound stage for modern recording and all of that stuff. And this was at the time when Eisner had taken over the studio, and apparently this memo had gone out about how he wanted to streamline the studio, get things more contemporary, and the note was all the old stuff must go. And so apparently this room was considered a bunch of old stuff. And Doc came to the studio one morning, and there was a dumpster out front, and these people who didn't know what they were dealing with had thrown out half of those machines. And Doc managed to get them to stop and take whatever had survived and wasn't busted and broken and sent. And I don't know if you are aware of those things, or if you had them or saw any of them, but they were extraordinary. They were really extraordinary artifacts from the studio. So I get that's definitely a firsthand story about how if you don't know what you have, it's just junk, and there's no one knows what to do with it. So I found that particularly fascinating.
Well, I can address that and tell you what exactly the reason why, and not, this isn't to be big headed, or this wasn't to like say, oh, I was part of the greatest era of the archives, but I'm telling you, other than when Dave Smith started it in 1970, was hired by Roy Disney. His first task was to save Walt's offices, and
Yeah.
that was like his first archiving gig. And then they went to, there's a great history just with those. And then all the years later, when I was there, because the prop department and the wardrobe department was closing. See, the reason they had the ability to do this is there was a vice president who was put in charge of the archives. He had many different responsibilities, but the archives fell under one. And this VP got the history, so he immediately went, hire more people. This is a serious time. We're gonna get warehouse space. We're gonna save this stuff. We're gonna. That's when they started D23. If you remember, that's like they started the magazine. That was all because they had one VP who was way up there, had access to Iger, and Iger also was a fan of the history, and that's why they allowed the archives to kind of grow, and they had these little archives TV shows and a lot of talk with them. It just was a great era because they gave them the funding and the archive to do it. And I'm not saying they pulled funding or anything later, but of course that VP is no longer there, and then now it's like the focus is not really there to be aggressive and spend the money to go around to Florida and grab the assets and spend time on the, you know what I mean? So they, and but they don't really need it as much now because they kind of regathered everything that was still at the company, and now it's all safe. But stuff like the sound effects they yeah, I never heard those were saved.
Oh wow,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
really
I mean,
tragic, because I mean, it's like I can picture it in my head. I can practically draw some of them for you, because they were all arranged and organized on these shelves and had numbers and a designation of what kind of sound they made. And the guys would just go grab one, take it in the studio, make their little sound they needed, and put
yeah.
it back. And they were absolutely amazing. So that's a real shame. But
Well,
um
Dave Smith, God bless him, I mean, literally had limited resources. Like he would go, I'm going to take this. And he'd take like one example, but he couldn't save it all. And that's again, 'cause there was space issues, and you have every piece you have to archive correctly. You know what I mean? So you can understand he was a small staff, and he did what he could.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
it's not great. Hey Dave, how come he didn't save the entire carousel from Mary Poppins? I mean, he couldn't have pulled. He couldn't have done it. You know what I mean? Just you'd have to have someone else helping. So.
Well, what were some of the earliest or the oldest props in the collection?
In the archives, like that I had nothing to do with. Of course, they were just there. Oh yeah. Oh, amazing. Like camera Walt Disney owned, or like the first Mickey and Minnie handmade stuffed or plush. If you they're called made by someone named Charlotte Clark. It's the ones you see Walt with.
Yeah.
There's a Mickey engineer that you see Walt riding the Disneyland train with a few times, like on the around opening day, and like the Mickey's wave. That's in the archives. So everything from like there's stuff like there's casts of Walt's hands. At some point they did that, and you could see his wedding ring, and I mean, just wow, I mean, my favorite thing I think in the entire collection is Walt's highball glass set from his office. with the WD initials on each one, very elegant. It's just classic,
Oh, that's fantastic!
Yeah.
Oh my god!
Yeah.
Well, one thing, you may not want to answer this, but based on what we said, just a few minutes ago, and from what various shows that I've watched, the perception is that Disney doesn't pay enough respect to their own history in films until they can monetize it somehow. So is that an accurate assessment, or you don't think that that's the case?
I don't know. No, I mean, oh my God. I mean, I try to always be the glass is half full, but I mean, you'd have to really. Disney's having tough time right now, right? I mean, keeping the current, and I'm a Walt person, so to me, it's like anything Walt taught us, go with that. And I don't necessarily think they're making decisions that Walt would agree with.
I would agree with you.
And I say that very politically correct and gently, because I like you, but Walt taught us a lot, and there's a lot to be learned from his great successes, as well as a couple of his admitted failures of what to do and maybe what not to do. I mean,
well, that's to me even kind of the point here, is that there are so many movies that were beloved by people growing up, and now Disney like only brings out like a certain few again. They a lot of like their collection is like buried.
They have that brilliant marketing where they would go every 7 years, they would reintroduce one of like the feature animated classics, and they would always show it in the theater. It would be an event, even as time went by, and then all of a sudden they were just like, nah, forget it. It's like, what, but that's, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I agree. It's a shame. I mean, the live action stuff in particular really, I think, doesn't get enough attention, because there's some wonderful movies.
Agreed.
Yeah.
That's
well,
in your opinion, what's one that's been buried too long?
What's that?
Your opinion, what's some movies that have been like too long ignored, I guess?
Oh, well, I mean, what are the we'd have to identify together. What do you think are the most like popular Disney movies? You think that is an example? Like, give me, if you guys think of one.
Well, look. I mean, I've talked about this with Ike many times. A lot of movies, like even the one I just mentioned. I know why it's not coming out again. Like one of our dinosaurs is missing. But I'm talking about like the attention to previous generations. To me, Ike is Disney royalty, and there are many stars. Like he's laughing now, but I'm being sincere. There are many people who starred in many of the Disney films that are being ignored that should be, paid attention to. They were part of the history of the company, and they're not treated as such by the company, to me, and in my opinion.
I mean, they barely pay attention to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and I would
that was
argue
gonna be my example of like one of the great Disney
True.
movies, for goodness sake, and yeah.
I mean, it's just like, I mean, I don't know, they don't even really seem to. I mean, Mary Poppins, I guess they tried to do again with Emily Blunt. I never saw that. How was that? Did you guys see that one? The Mary
Okay.
Poppins
It's
Returns or
not,
something?
not the
I
same.
tried. I tried.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just didn't it
See, to me,
didn't draw me in.
it falls into the category of, ooh, sacred territory. Don't make a sequel. Can't touch that.
Yeah.
You can't make a sequel to It's a Wonderful Life, and you can't make a sequel to, some movies. And I think Mary Poppins falls into that. Don't mess with that cat. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Oh yeah.
That's me.
Yeah. No, I mean
Yeah.
I completely agree. Yeah.
But they're gonna try. They're gonna try, and if it's good, then I guess, do we win? I guess so. Everybody wins if it's good. But I didn't see it, so.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned D23, and you were behind that in the expo. How did that come about?
The same guy was the VP I was referring to. He was, he spearheaded that. I was lucky enough to be able to be in the group and I remember specifically saying, with D23 had been decided, I said, well, we should do like our Comic-Con. I said, Disney could have their own Comic-Con. And then the VP was like, oh, I've never been to Comic-Con. I'm like, oh my God. Well, let's go to Comic-Con and you'll see it, and just imagine everything, as Comic-Con, DC, Marvel, except it's Disney's version where it's just theme parks and studios and, that kind of stuff. And so we went and he got it. And then the next year they did the D23 Expo. It was kind of that simple.
Oh,
Man.
Mhm.
I mean, it was kind of like my little version of the Great Monorail story, how that got created. Bob Gurr, the guy who drew all the Disneyland vehicles, had the monorail sketched out. Walt Disney came in and he said, Bobby, can you build that? And Bob Gurr goes, yeah, I think we can, Walt. And he goes, okay. And then he walks out, and that was the monorail getting greenlit. I mean, it was 60 seconds. Maybe that's why things were so cool back then, because not a lot of people messing up the soup or causing trouble or cutting corners. It was just Walt Disney creative. Yes, I like it. Go make it great. And then we have the monorail. That's my lesson. So that's how the expo, very similar. Just, this would be cool. Let's do it. Okay, great.
Well, look, I mean, it's been long lasting. I mean, on Twitter, whenever there's the D23 Expo, it's all day long. The latest update. It's constantly now.
I mean, that was my favorite thing, because then the archives did, at least for the few years that I was still there, did an exhibit every year where we pull out all the cool stuff that we had. That was probably the one time to really see what was in the archives, I think, first. Since the beginning of it, from the 70s. We even created, this was something I was really excited about, all the Kim Weber furniture, which is what the architect that made the Disney studios also designed the animation desks and the chairs and the ink. And because think about it, you couldn't just buy that kind of equipment. You had to make it. If you're an animation studio, you have to make your animation desk. You have to make the cart that you put the paint on for the ink and paint department. It's really minutia, but when you start thinking about it, like, okay, yeah, I guess you would have to make that. But these pieces of furniture have become very collectible, kind of a very like Art Deco style. But I remember I recreated the exact animator's room down to the linoleum floor. And I knew I had done right, because John Lasseter saw it. And he just kept looking at the whole thing and didn't care anything about the miniatures and the costumes. It was all about that recreated animator's, desk at the studio. So it just something for everybody, right? So.
Wow.
Well, you're not there anymore, but are you
No,
aware of some of the things that Disney is planning for the 100th anniversary, or no?
I have no idea.
No idea.
I saw, I mean, other than just as a lifelong Disney, fan, maybe not, maybe no longer fan after you leave the company. You've kind of, it's just, you just coexist. I'll put it like that way. There's me and there's Disney. But I mean, I've been to Disneyland recently, but I don't really know what they're doing. I know they're having trouble with the Star Wars franchise, if they want to mention that,
Yeah,
Of
yeah,
course.
I'd say
I mean, are you guys Star Wars fans?
up until the recent movies.
That's
Yeah,
exactly my answer.
the original, yeah, of course.
Yeah. I mean, are you a Star Wars fan? I'm like, not anymore.
Yeah.
That's my answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel oversaturated, and I can't yeah. It's just, yeah, it's become its own genre of storytelling. It's interesting.
Like, there has to be certain rules though for you, because as a member of classic Star Trek legend, is there some sort of a guidebook they give you about what you can and can't say? Because if you're like, you know what I mean? I don't know if you know where I'm going. I don't know. Like, are you allowed? Could you be in a Star Wars if you got cast, or would there be some sort of like?
Oh, yeah, there's no exclusivity, especially since they killed me.
Okay.
I have absolutely feel no obligation to the franchise other than just
But I
remembering it fondly.
I wonder if that would be some sort of like paradox break in the timeline if like someone like you got cast in Star Wars, like the fans couldn't wait him, it's like, don't know, that'd be a funny
Yeah,
movie.
You would have to be killed in it, though. By the way.
Yeah. Oh, probably. Yeah, for sure. Well,
That's
well, while your time there at Disney, what sort of what perks did you have? Because I know for me, one of the great things was I actually for a very long time got free tickets to Disneyland and all the coupons that I wanted for rides for a very, very long time. And of course, that eventually ended. So were there any things like that available to you while you were there?
Oh yeah. Well, we had, I think, and I didn't really know what kind of stuff came with, at least with my job. I was a corporate employee, so they would tell me that's different. It's a different thing. I don't know. I think that was, I had a credit card that I could, charge stuff with. And I remember that they were just, we don't even want to hear about it unless it's like, over this amount. So that was kind of nice. And then also I had what they called the silver pass, which you can get into Disneyland, you and like 3 people anytime. And that's something that's when you can actually go to Disneyland and like, hey, you want to go to Disneyland today? We're Southern Californians. Great, let's go. Can't do that now. It's like reservations and
Oh yeah,
going a few days down the road, that kind of a thing. It's not the spontaneity's gone, unfortunately. But yeah, and then later I ended up I was like a dual agent for Disney because I had my studio ID and then I had a Disneyland ID, and which was really cool because they were like, go find the artifacts at the park that we can get for the archives. And I was like, oh, okay, let's do this. And then I would be like, it'd be like detective work with the cast members looking for animatronics, and they'd be like, up above, I'm not kidding, this is absolutely true. Up above Pirates of the Caribbean, above the grotto, Mr. Johnson from Mission to Mars is stashed up there. You didn't hear it from me, that kind of a thing. I mean, literally, it was like, how do I get up there? And then like I went up there, and sure enough, Mr. Johnson, if you remember Mission to Mars, he was like the head of mission control. He was like stashed up there. I mean, so he came down. I got him for the archive. So, I mean, you can't write this stuff, right?
No,
I
that's
mean,
crazy.
it sounds like, oh, that's complete made up nonsense. It's like every bit of it's true, you know?
What are some of the more obscure Disney props that you own?
Well, for me, I love the movie The Black Hole, because that
Oh,
was
great movie.
released
Yeah.
in '79.
Hmm.
Disney, even though they were working on it in the early '70s, it still was like, oh, Star Wars was out. Hurry up and get something sci-fi out. That's what got Black Hole on the fast track. But I remember I was doing some stuff at Western Costumes and sort of doing the same thing later that I did with Disney. I was helping them pull out the history, and I was like, oh, the costumes from Black Hole, and I was able to buy those.
Oh,
So
nice.
that's one of my favorite things. But of course, and then it was neat to see that, Disney didn't have them because Western Costumes owned them. So it all made sense. So it's neat when you
Wow.
kind of put the pieces together. And that's a whole thing. We can do a podcast just on Disney wardrobe and why something was at Disney and why something was never at Disney. I mean, that we're talking the minutia there, but there's some collectors out there that love that stuff here. I don't know.
Oh
So
man.
yeah.
Well,
yeah.
you also got to tour the Lucasfilm archives. What on earth was
Yeah.
that like?
I worked for a company in the early '90s that had a license to make Star Wars product, and I had got to go up at that particular point. But in history of Lucasfilm, apparently there was a change of the guard in the Lucasfilm archives, which went from being very lackadaisical, where you see people up there kind of like looking at the stuff, holding the stuff, to like when I went up there, it was literally like, okay, don't look over there. Like, what do you mean? Like, well, there's props. They didn't even want you looking at the props, much less holding the things. I mean, it was a very, very big change, and so I didn't get to see much that day. But when I actually got to go back because I was actually returning George Lucas's Captain EO costume to him, which is a whole other story. And then that day they were very much more accommodating there, because it was the Disney. Oh, he's from Disney. So my wife and I were there, and we looked around, and that was neat. Then we saw everything, and that was a great day. I mean,
Well,
I can go into more minutia of stuff that was funny if you guys care. Like, I can tell one quick story with that.
sure.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Okay, you'll love this. So there was a couple archival boxes that were like in the entryway, and archival boxes, are what they sound like. They keep the manuscript safe and stuff. So you want to see something cool? I'm like, well, everything's cool. They're like, well, look at this. So they lifted up the archival box, and it was George Lucas's handwritten manuscript for the Star Wars that was all on like loose leaf paper.
Wow.
And like written out in pencil. And obviously I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. And I'm like, they said something like, oh yeah, this is George's. And I was like, well, isn't this all George's? And they were like, oh, well, yes, but this one he keeps in his office. And it was on just some sort of a museum display, and it came back, and they were taking it back to his office, where I was like, wow, that's just crazy. So that was a neat thing to see.
Wow. Well, I want to move on to one thing, because you mentioned wife. You and your wife have a lot of association with my favorite film of all time, Back to the Future.
Oh yeah.
You wrote the coffee table book, one behind me, Back to the Future Almanac, with Bob Gale wrote the forward to. How did you get involved with Back to the Future, and how did Bob Gale get involved with you? So,
Bob Gill, I had written to him in college, and when I was in film school, and and he was so cool. He sent me back an exhibit catalog that they were doing for Back to the Future. And then he proceeded to give me a bunch of advice on how in the future, don't ever handwrite a letter. No one's going to take you seriously, and don't do this. And I mean, it just proceeded to just like rip me a new one, or to be very, and I was like, wow, Bob Gale, I'm like, doesn't suffer fools. So later in life, when I met him, I'm like, I learned from that, you have to, say what you say, walk the walk, talk the talk. And we had a mock-up for Back to the Future Almanac, and we showed it to him, and he was looking at it, and he's like, he's kind of flipping through it, and then said, well, would you be willing to endorse this? He goes, not only am I going to endorse this, he's like, I'm going to work on this with you. He's like, you got to come to my house and help me look through all my stuff, blah, 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 blah. So that was the beginning. Wow. So I think that, you just realize, be prepared and take it seriously. And he's been great. So, yeah,
man.
Honored.
Well, what do you think it is about the movie that it remains so beloved and popular to this day? I mean, with new generations constantly loving it.
I've thought a lot about this, and I don't know if I've ever really said this to anybody, but I think it's because the heart of the story is about friendship between Doc and Marty and the loyalty there. I think that's a special thing because I don't know. I think it's about those two. That's the magic for me, at least, I think.
Yeah.
And then when you add the ingredients of smart storytelling and beautifully designed, the production design is genius, and it's just eye candy, that trilogy to me. Friendship, and then Zemeckis and Gale had a lot of talent.
Yeah.
It's so smart, those scripts.
You've been featured in 4 different Back to the Future documentaries, including Out of Time.
So,
Saving the DeLorean Time Machine. What was that experience like, getting to rebuild such an iconic, car and movie prop? Was it like the little kid in you came out again?
It was awesome. I had seen that car falling apart for firsthand since 85. So, because I would be, you'd be at Universal or work on Universal movies, and I would be like, oh, the back parking lots where all the DeLoreans are, and they had several of them at one time, and you go back there and you'd be like, ooh, that one's not looking so good anymore, and like, why don't they do something with these? And nobody cared, it's just they don't. And so all these years later, it was neat to finally be a part of the team that was able to like make the car look great, so it was really far gone. I mean, bad. Yeah, parts missing.
Terrible.
Yeah. So, but it looks, you wouldn't know the difference now. I mean, it's at the Peterson Automotive Museum.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, what props do you have from the films?
Back to the Future, I was obsessed with finding, because if you're a Star Wars person, even though they shot a lot of it in Van Nuys with the special effects, most of it's in England, because they shot, Superman, Christopher Reeve films, everything's in England. But when Back to the Future was shot, 2 or 3 blocks up the street from me, so I was like, okay, the stuff's in town. So anyway, I ended up meeting the property master, and he had a good example of everything that he made, and I was able to get a lot of stuff from him. So I have a lot of stuff from the films. I mean, I'm very proud to say. But I have a hoverboard, one of the only matched hoverboards.
Oh.
And a lot of it's in the book, actually. I don't really call attention to it, but if there's a prop in the book, it's probably one that I have saved. So.
Well,
do you have the cover?
It's behind me, but we're going to post it within the interview also.
There's the book, the thing that's behind you, Jonathan. Yeah. There's a dust jacket, and the dust jacket comes off, and then the cover looks like the sports almanac kind of. So it's got like anyway, but there's a couple like hidden Mickeys, if you will. Hidden Back to Future things on that cover. A couple of the original props are on the cover as well. So thank you for asking about this stuff. I want to start. We got to start talking about Star Trek 2. You know.
Oh, we are. You and I have a date to have a totally separate conversation about that.
Good. And we'll talk a lot about Bill Shatner.
Absolutely.
I have to call him Bill because I have met him a few times, but I don't know him at all. I mean, or anything. Matter of fact, I just have to say this with William Shatner. People always are very nice. Oh, would you like to come meet William Shatner, et cetera, et cetera. And I always say nothing could top what I've already experienced with him as a kid, and I've just left it that way because he was very nice to me. Is nowadays, like, I don't know, but so yeah, we got to talk about William Shatner. I gotta ask you though, have you seen him at all in the last few years?
No, I have not.
Okay.
I'm trying to think if I even saw him because I was at the Las Vegas 50th anniversary convention that Kirstie Alley actually came to, and was the only one she's ever done.
Wow.
And most of the cast was there. I'm sure Bill was there, but I didn't see him there because I mean, you want to talk about, it's like the Secret Service move these people around through these events, and they come through side back doors and go straight on stage. They're never wandering the halls. So no, the short answer is no.
What would happen if you went out there? Would people tend to want autographs immediately, or would they want photos, or do you think they'd be like, that guy thinks he's Peter Preston walking around in costume kind of thing, or what would they be doing?
Well, it's interesting. I love conventions. First of all, let me just get that straight out. They're a great deal of fun. It's a chance to interact with the fans, talk to people, find out the things they like, that they remember, find out what they want to talk about. And everybody's different, and those autograph collectors are a very, very unique group of people, like we all are. I mean, we have our eccentricities, right? These things that we love and we do. And you can see behind me, I've got Mickey Mouse. I got Mickey Mouse all over here. I got Mickey Mouse all over there. So that's my thing. And some people just want a picture with you. Some people just want to say hi. Most people want an autograph, something they, to take with them to show they've had a personal interaction with you. And then there are the ones that are so into it, they have rolling carts they bring along that have there are people that I have met that have these rolling carts of pictures that are already signed by people, or specific pictures they pull out that they want you to sign. They give you the pen they want you to sign it with. And some of them even have these big books that have, especially with Star Trek, the science fiction movies ever made, and they follow the conventions around to find people from all these different movies, and then you have to sign your name against inside the book by where your printed name is. So it's a very interesting hobby that people spend, believe me, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on. But it's also, at the same time, I like to call it the celebrity mall, because you've been to them, what it's like. There's tables everywhere, right? And there's like all these different celebrities, or with the Vegas convention, all the Star Trek people from the original episodes, from the other shows, the spinoffs and all that. And we're all gathered around, and we're chit-chatting with each other as people are walking by, and they kind of walk by and they look you up and down and they say, yeah, oh yeah, that's right, you were the Peter Preston guy. Yeah, okay. And then they just move on because they're really not interested at all, because at the same time, everyone's got a budget, right? They come to these things with a certain autograph budget, and they can only spend so much. So they make a decision, are they going to Are they going to get the Calvin Kleins or the Levi's? You know, what are they going to
Right.
buy? And it just cracks me up, and I love it to death. It's really an
Or
amazing.
or they're just like, we have to focus on the '60s series, not the future,
Yeah,
or you just something like
yeah,
that.
they're completing a collection, you know.
No, exactly.
Um, yeah, it's fascinating. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, I love that. I mean, does it help? I mean, Disney. Getting back to Disney though, they don't do a lot of promotion or a lot of big things with their great, wonderful '60s and '70s live action movies.
No, they don't.
That
No,
was
they don't.
what we were talking about.
Yeah,
And
I've never been invited to D23 for anything. I think the one in this, I don't think this was a Disney sanctioned event, although it was on Disney World property, was a, oh gosh, I have a little plaque from it up here. The the KF, wait a minute. Sorry, I'm walking away from the camera for a minute.
yeah,
The NFFC, the Disneyana
yes,
Enthusiasts
yes, that's
Club.
nice.
Yeah, and they actually had me out. They had me out to speak, and Dave Smith was actually in the audience, so I got to tell a lovely Dave Smith story and embarrass him a little bit.
Hilarious.
Yeah, this is okay. This is a total aside. If we run along with the show, I'll just cut this story out, but I think you'll get a kick out of it too. This is going back a long time when the original Ingersoll watches were hard to come by, but they were hard to find. Okay. And pre-internet, you couldn't search for these things. That's how far back it was. And I was at a collectible shop somewhere on Melrose Avenue. And there, sure enough, was an original Mickey Mouse Ingersoll with a leather band. It looked like it was in really great condition, and it was very expensive. And I thought, man, I really want this watch, but I don't want to just buy it because I don't know. I mean, is it real? Is it, you know, how do I not authenticate it, but do I find out what are the things that I need to look for? So I left the store, went to a phone booth, payphone. I called Dave. He answered his phone, thankfully. And I said, okay, what do I look for? And he told me everything. He said, look at the back of the watch, see if there's any scratch marks around it. If it feels like the backside's been removed and replaced, it's probably been repaired. It might not be 100% original. And so those are the things you look for. But if it looks all clean, go for it. He said, the price seems to make sense. So I was so darn excited. And he said, you know, have them wind it up and show you that it functions. And I said, okay. I didn't even want to touch the watch. That's how nervous I was. So I went back in the store. The guy's showing me the watch. I said, well, if you don't mind, if you could wind it up just to show me that it works. He said, sure, absolutely. So he winds it up. You know, the little Mickey at the bottom's going around and everything's sounding good. I'm looking at it, all looks great. And I set it down and I said, okay, I'm going to buy it. And I pull out my checkbook and I'm literally almost finished writing the check for this thing when the watch goes tick, 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 and stopped. And I said, excuse me, but the watch just stopped. He said, oh no, it can't. And I said, yeah, it did. I didn't touch it. I didn't do anything with it. And he said, oh my God. And he's trying to wind it again. And the watch was dead.
Oh.
And I said, man, 60 more seconds and I would have walked out of the store with that watch, and I didn't buy it. So so I told that story at the event, and it had just tickled him to death that I even remembered that.
That's just,
it was incredible.
Did you tell the story to Dave though? Dave heard the story.
He was in the audience actually when I was speaking, and when I knew he was there, and I said, I have to tell this story because I especially in terms of Disneyana and collectibles, I just thought, the crowd got a big kick out of it, and Dave was very flattered. But yeah.
I can tell you Dave's stories. You want a Dave story?
Of course.
Okay. I love Disneyland history, love the theme park. That was the highlight, just being able to do anything at Disney. So I would have loved to have been a show designer or something. So I don't have the privilege of ever saying, oh, I put this into Disneyland, but I can say I took stuff out of Disneyland. So
Yeah.
I got to take Walt's office out, which was at that point in the Lincoln building, they had the formal office, because the working office, Walt had a formal office, and then the working office was actually where he spent most of his time. Why? Because that's the one that had the bar. They had the Star Trek doors that literally would open. Have you ever seen? I mean, that's all true.
Wow.
About that with Walt's office. I mean, we're talking, he passed away in 66. So in the early 60s, this studio executive with the buttons that open up into a bar, and then you open the bar doors and all the bar lights up, and it has like GE embossed in the metal inside of Walt's bars, cupboards. And these are just details. Again, if somebody said, oh, they're making all that up, it's like, no, 100%. Anyway, but that was just how cool the working office's bar was. But the formal office is where he had the piano. I got to take that out of the opera house and catalog each and every piece and all this. So that was a huge honor for me. But I came back I'd have to drive to Anaheim every day because I live like not too far from Universal Studios. So it's a good commute. But I came back the next day, and somebody had broken Walt's glass coffee table.
Oh, wow.
Like the famous, it like was shattered. And
Oh.
I'm like, oh
Oh.
my, what,
Wow.
I don't know what happened, or what. So, geez. So next time I was at the studio, it was like either later that evening or whatever. I went to Dave and I said, yeah, Dave, because he wasn't working on this project, but he was the guru of the office. As I said, Walt's coffee table, I got to Disneyland, and the top was shattered. He goes, oh, that's okay. They shuttered that back in 1970. So it's not even real anyway. And I was just like, oh my God. So there's the Dave story. Yeah.
Well, and one of the things I loved about him so much, and and I'm sure you know this, but he used to like to correct people and say, I'm not really an archivist, I'm actually a librarian.
Oh,
and
he would say that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. That was very important to him, because that apparently was what his degree was in and what his profession was before.
Library science. Yeah,
library science. And yeah, people would say, oh, you're the archivist, and he says, no, I just head the archives, but I'm actually a librarian. And it just used to, I just thought that was very interesting. Yeah.
That's, let's make a Star Trek. That's very Spock-like of Dave. He'd be the Vulcan of, like, he would be very Vulcan-ish.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh my God. All right, so back to you. We want to hear about the George Reeves Superman costume from the 50s TV series, as well as the Christopher Reeve movie costume. How did you acquire those?
The George Reeves.
Yeah.
Okay, that one, in a world of just following original memorabilia and all this, George Reeves costumes always seem to be extremely mysterious because there are so many fakes out there. And it came to my attention that it was like, how do you ever know which one is? Because the people that are supposedly the experts, people have said that have made fakes. So
wow.
How do you learn from anything? I mean, it's like, it's one thing. I mean, I could tell people about Pirates of the Caribbean wardrobe. Why? Because I was one of the ones that was unboxing it from the production, setting aside, so I saw it firsthand. So I could say, this is a Johnny Depp coat because I've seen, or this isn't, that's how you have to start, is you have to know have an example of something or work with somebody who worked on it. But with the George Reeves, it was always, I don't know, you can't trust anything. The one that I ended up getting, turns out it was in the hands of the special effects technician and never was let out of his possession. So that was the one, when that thing became available for me, I was like, I got to get that one, because that way we'll know this is how they should look. It's never been out of this guy's possession. So nothing's been changed, nothing's been altered. And that's really important for an archivist like myself, to see something as close to the original way, it was. That gets into a whole other issue. Sometimes things get restored, but I'm actually not a big fan of restoration cosmetically anymore. I used to be one like, oh, make it look good, and it's like now it's like, leave it, let it look as beat up and as, I mean, stabilize it so it doesn't tear itself apart with its, but you know what I mean, but let it look beat up and stuff. Anyway, that I went off on a tangent there, but anyway, but yeah. So the George Reeves, he was unmessed with. So very, very lucky to be the caretaker of that at this point. And now we can say this is what they should look like.
We did have on Lori Jacobson, a Hollywood historian to it. So she says there's no doubt in her mind that he was murdered. Is that what you think also?
Oh, I think when you look into that, there are just so many things that leads to that over the other way. It's, I don't know. Have you guys gone down that rabbit hole, Jonathan? Have you actually?
I have. I've been. I mean, to me, the same thing. There's no doubt that he's murdered. I mean, that's.
I mean, yeah. Like, do you know the backstory of that?
I really don't. I'm not.
Let me get basically his George's mistress. Her husband was, I'm having a brain crash. The fixer, Eddie Mannix. Eddie Mannix works for Metro Goldwyn Mayer his whole career. When there was a problem of any sorts, labor disputes or actors not behaving, Eddie Mannix was the person you would call, he was the fixer. And they said that, so when you have a husband that's the fixer and you're the mistress, when you break up with the mistress and break her heart, I think George Reeves got fixed. That's sort of what is, Jonathan.
Yeah,
you say that's fair?
I would say that. Yes.
Reader's Digest version.
Yeah.
So yes, that's why they say they think George Reeves was murdered versus suicide.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your. Oh, sorry,
Jonathan, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say your Star
Trek.
Trek.
It's a grim subject, I know, but
yeah,
it is grim.
Yeah, I feel like I should break out into song now, but I'm not going to do that. But talking about Star Trek, you've got many of the costumes from the original series. How did you come by those?
Yeah, those were. I sort of tracked down where they went to. Paramount sold a good portion of their collection to another costume company, and that costume company was, all this old sci-fi stuff doesn't rent, let's get rid of it, and it was a conglomeration not just of Paramount but also of Universal sci-fi stuff. So I was able to go in and initially I actually bought a huge collection of the Universal stuff, which is how I was able to save a lot of that stuff. And then there were Star Trek costumes that were in there mixed in, and I was like, aha, I think this place also had Star Trek. And then later we were able to go in and get that stuff from the rental place, and most of it was the Star Trek stuff. There was also Mork and Mindy and Happy Days, but none. I didn't keep any of that stuff. I had to focus on Star Trek. I was given sort of the, when the guy found the Tutankhamun stash, that was sort of like how I would compare it with Star Trek for me. So I feel like, I've got this honor of finding it, and then I've added pieces to it since to try to make it a well-rounded representation. I've also traded pieces away that I had, because I had a lot of the guest stars and stuff like that. So I had traded a few of those over the year to get some like of the Star Trek, like the Starfleet uniforms, because those were not in the collection that I had discovered. It was
Mhm.
literally like everything except the Starfleet uniforms, which is
Okay.
explain, which is goes back to my criticism of studios. They don't know anything. Let's get rid of the Star Trek stuff. Well, that show's popular. Well, save the good stuff. And if they save the good stuff, it's saving the uniforms.
Right.
But all the female costuming and all that, that's all where the art came in, Not that you know what I mean? And that's why there was
Sure.
an exhibit of Bill Tice's female pieces that was at the Smithsonian Institute in the early 90s. So anyway, that was most of the stuff that was discarded, or we
Well,
don't need this, sold off.
on
Yeah.
the same subject of trading stuff away, that's one of the things that I've been curious about. Is have you been ever contacted like by families of the people that from the show, like, hey, would you sell some of this? Like, this is like sentimental value to me. Would you sell something like like my dad or my mom or whatever? It's like,
Yeah, not so much with me. There are people that when I first got into this, or became aware that stuff, very naive. I was in film school and I got to go to Universal, or might have been working on a Universal project. And I was like, oh, can I see some of the costumes from this show or that show? And they'd be like, we don't keep that stuff. You know what I mean? I'd be like, wait, what? And then you started learning, like, oh, there isn't just, you just assume this stuff is like everything's precious, but that's not the case. It's impossible for studios to keep everything, right? So so from there, I kind of got into it, and at that time, other people I knew that I know better now, who were a lot more savvy than me, that had made a name. They got contacted a lot more by the families of at that time.
yeah,
Nowadays, everybody knows the auction companies. Everybody has the internet, so it's easier for those people to go direct to the auction company.
right.
So people like myself, at least, I don't really get approached too often. If I get anything, I have to go and find it,
Oh.
and you know what I mean. Like, and I've had lots of stories
So
like that.
people do hire you to procure items for them
Well,
still?
I not really. Well, they have, but I learned later that it's like it never. I might as well just procure them for myself and sell them. I mean, you know what I mean. But unfortunately for me, I don't have a great big interest in the money part of it, so I only really looked for things that from movies or TV shows that meant something to me.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? So,
Yeah.
uh,
Well, to
um,
me, that's always been the heart of collecting anyway.
yeah.
I mean, that's really what it's about. But
I mean, the Mini Winnie was out because I love that movie, and they were working on the Race to Witch Mountain, and I was like, we should bring it out here. There'll probably be opportunities, and that's how I met you. I mean, so if nothing
I
else,
was
that's the magic of these pieces. I feel in a way give back, because they all have their own a little bit of energy to them.
Mhm.
Some people may not believe that, but when you do really see the costume or the Mini Winnie, as we saw, I mean, there's a vibe to it.
yeah.
They're you just tell they're what we see on these beloved movies and television shows that so many of us cherish.
Well, no, it's
Magic,
also it's a
magical.
it's a handmade model, and that has always fascinated me about movies and TV shows, the props and the things that they're making for them. And of course, now with the massive proliferation of sci-fi, and a lot
Mhm.
of it's digital, but they're still building actual physical models for a lot of things. That stuff just I just eat it up. So through all of this, you've kind of become like the go-to guy on shows like Pawn Stars and Collector's Call, and you mentioned auction houses. How did
Yeah.
that start?
Well, the auction houses, I started just getting to know, because every now and then they would get something that would be something. I'm not really one for buying at the auctions. I mean, the budget, you have to have a big budget for that. So once something gets to the auction, it's not really something that I'm going for myself, because I feel like it's going to be purchased, and then it's going to be taken care of, and then that's the most important thing. So but I got to know, sometimes you want to go see a piece in person and you get to know everybody, and then they start, it's a small community really, I guess, that of the people that sort of deal with this stuff and on the authentication. And some of the guys that were up, I had met in the 2000s that were just into this are now like CEOs of major auction companies. So I mean, so, and then it's just, if you just stay in touch with these guys, and they'll call you and be like, hey, what do you think of this? And I'm like, oh yeah. And then it's like, whether you're getting paid to consult or not, you'd be having the same conversation with these people, which is the funny thing.
I do want to. I do want to ask before we do let you go. After, I know you have the camera from the Universal films. I'm such a huge fan of the Universal monster movies. Do you have any props from the monster movies itself? So
no. See, those things those were identified and cherished artifacts of Hollywood history far before I was even born. So people like Forrest Ackerman, if you've ever heard the name, or Bob Burns, have those early items and what exists, because a lot of those monster movie items are made of foam, and even the Wolfman cane, the head that that Lon Chaney Jr. beats the guy, I mean, that exists, but it's a foam casting of it. So it's probably like a big crouton right now. You don't want to put any pressure on it, it would explode. But most of those monster movie things either don't exist, or what do exist are with probably those guys. And now I know Kurt Hammett, if I said it correctly, the guitarist from Metallica. I know I've never met him, but I know he's a huge collector of horror and has really put together a wonderful archive of that. So there are people that are continuing on the horror legacy. I know I'm not a big horror guy. I like the classic monsters, but that's a whole other genre. God bless those collectors, but it's not my focus.
Well, you're involved in so many projects. What are you personally working on next?
Well, I got the project that I shouldn't probably say anything, but I know Ike has agreed to participate in. Thank you very much. I can't wait. So we tease.
It will be fun.
Yes.
And also a couple books at Krofft, which is, even though we're going to go to work at Krofft, it's like beyond whatever we're doing there. I'm taken on for 2 Krofft books. So one will be the visual history of the company, which I'm so excited about, because there's nothing been out like that. And they have a wonderful photo archive, probably the one thing that is intact. And that's one thing I'm still so excited to get out there, because I mean, the photos are like, the career they've had is amazing. So it'll be shots from the early puppet shows, and then all the photography from their TV shows that has never been seen. I mean, they shot stuff, they just never used it because it's a TV show. They haven't had a publication, maybe 1 or 2 shots for like a sticker book or a coloring book, but so those are the 2 things I'm really looking forward to. The Ike involved secret project, and then which is outside of Krofft, and then the Krofft visual history book. So
well, I gotta say, we've had so many questions. Don't keep, so we'd love to have you back. When that book comes out, we'd love to have you back too. We barely scratched the surface of the questions that we had for you. So
I haven't asked. I wanted to ask Ike tons more stuff. So we'll have to do this again sometime.
Absolutely.
You know who Ike you should speak to, if you're up for it, is Harrison Ellenshaw.
Yes.
You familiar with Harrison?
Yes, I have.
I'm not.
Yes,
Okay, Harrison is the son of Peter Ellenshaw, who was the matte painter that
Mary Poppins, for one.
Yeah, he was brought over by Walt to do like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and all that. Anyway, so he won the Academy Award for Mary Poppins. Harrison followed in his dad's footsteps and was also the matte painter on Star Wars and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
As well as all the early Disney movies, Pete's Dragon. And you guys share a connection. He's the guy that was behind the visuals for the opening sequence for Escape to Witch Mountain.
Okay.
Beautiful credits of you guys.
Yeah.
So that's Harrison's work there.
Oh my God, that would be so great, because I've had somebody recently ask me on Facebook, I think it was, whether or not, and I thought this was very sort of amazing that someone would even ask this, if the rotoscope sequences were actually Kim and I. And because I know Kim and I so well, I've watched the movie so many times, and writing my memoir, I had to watch it so many times. I can see that a couple of the shots are Kim and I, but I think there are some in there that are not Kim and I would be very curious about how that whole opening sequence came together. That would be fantastic to learn about.
He's great, and he has had such a wonderful career. He was the visual effects supervisor for Superman 4. I know a lot of people don't like that movie as much as the other ones, and Harrison will be the first to make fun of it. But I mean, but the fact is, just being there working on a Christopher Reeve Superman Harrison's got great stories from that shoot.
I have an Ellen Shaw hanging on my wall. Actually, I have an Ellen Shaw Mary Poppins thing on my wall.
Oh yeah, and he loved his dad, and always happy to talk about the great Peter Ellen Shaw. But yeah, he'd be perfect for you guys, and so yeah, I'll put you guys in touch.
We would love that and appreciate it. Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. Well, hey. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for doing this. This was fantastic. Thank you. Well, I'm Jonathan Rosen, and along with Ike Eisenmann, this has been Pop Culture Retro. And again, a very special thanks to Rob Klein. And please subscribe.
Thank you for listening to Pop Culture Retro, where no one was hurt during the making of this podcast.